Our subject today is centering consciousness. But while we were setting this up, a question arose from our live audience. So in my understanding, the question is something like that. I've mentioned that meditation is a process of listening in the silent center that is within you. But when I try to listen, when I try to maintain silence, all kinds of thoughts bubble up from the unconscious mind. Yeah. And so I can't be listening because all these other things I have to listen to. The process of meditation is one of ease and let go. It starts off with relaxation. And the relaxation will come from an attitude that says that I have faith in everything. It comes from a faithfulness. It comes from a trusting attitude that I'm sitting here and will be supported. That life is intrinsically good, that God made the world and saw that it was good. Only we see it as bad. It's complete opposite. Because we're not prepared to sit where God sits on his golden throne and see things as he sees them, then life becomes something of a struggle. And then when we sit down for meditation and use language such as trying to meditate, or I have to work at it, then it's no longer meditation. And if we put in the first person singular I, it's no longer meditation. And if we put in the future tense, I need some result, it's no longer meditation. Meditation, and I use it again and again and again, the most beautiful definition of devotional meditation is contained in the wonderful, wonderful Western savant Joel Goldsmith. Meditation, he says, is a song of gratitude that God is here, God is now, God is love. As soon as we assert this, we are in a listening mode. And so we have to lead ourselves up to that point. Particularly at the end of a day when all the traffic of the day's activities start crowding in. We have to find a different formula. Now what we have to do is we have to imagine that the whole of the universe is something like a series of waves, a whole ocean of waves. Swami Vivekananda gave a wonderful definition of what is Ishvara. We can loosely translate it as God, but it is that one that is responsible for the rhythm and harmony in the universe by its virtually, completely its presence. By the fact of its presence, everything moves in a certain designed rhythm. Nothing bumps into each other. And in that, there's a process of creation as well as life, as well as destruction. And you might say 2 points are there, birth and death. And what we call life is just a transit period. If we think of that in that way, we may have a very different view of life and a very different view of how we process it and how we proceed to act within it. If this is the case that we can imagine something like an ocean, we can also imagine that the localized centers. And so Swami Vivekananda said, Ishvara, that thing that puts everything in harmony, is like a circle whose circumference is nowhere, but whose center is everywhere. If we have an eye to see it, we will see the center everywhere. What is the individual soul? It's a circle whose circumference is nowhere, but whose center is in one particular place. In both cases, the word center is used. The concept of center is used. Now, we have a faculty that is an expression of consciousness. If this whole ocean is nothing more than consciousness, we say nothing more, it doesn't mean to say it's something less. It means it's something glorious. Consciousness being everywhere, one of its expressions in that localized vicinity will be attention. And attention as a faculty is something like a revealing beam. And we have something in our localized area called will, and we can direct this beam wherever we want. But if we don't direct it at all, it will float around randomly. It's like if you drop a torch in the ocean, it'll go in every which way. But if we grasp it in the hand, we'll direct it to where we want. So it's the art of catching that attention and directing it in a joyful and sporting way. Now, when we sit down for meditation, we first have to understand, let us eliminate this first person singular, future tense. Let us take all these thoughts and accept them. They have a right to be there. Just as if you're walking down a central street in a big city, there will be noise all around you. I remember one devotee who was going to go to Varanasi said, "Oh, I'm visiting this most holy city. How wonderful, I'll be able to meditate so nicely there." And I said, well, if you go to Varanasi, what you will find is you'll find not only a vibrant city with all the noise and trammels and busyness of a normal city, but the extra factor, that is a holy city, so pilgrims will be all over the place. There will be beggars. There will be cows. There will be dirt. There will be what we call landmines. Landmines means the cow's, dung on the road, and you have to avoid it. There will be hooting of traffic. There will be the fragrant scent, not of incense, but of diesel fumes. There'll be din and noise. There'll be people shouting, people talking. There was one very, very beautiful, I think it was in Varanasi, one very beautiful scene where there was a cow standing looking into a shop window. I think that was Varanasi. We took a photo of it. Even the cows go shopping in Varanasi. How will you meditate with all of this noise going on? You see, the mind should be able to be in a stable condition in any environment, and two versions of meditation will have to be there. Meditation with eyes open and meditation with eyes closed. When we typically talk of meditation, we're talking of with eyes closed. Why would we close the eyes? So that we can block out all the external distractions and start an inward journey. But inevitably, when you close the eyes, there's a muscular tension as well. And so in meditation, we first of all gaze, if you will, and allow the eyes to close in such a way that they are relaxed. So that you're neither looking outside nor are you looking inside at that moment. A kind of brooding expression before you take your inward journey. And acceptance has to be there. You have to accept the body. You have to accept all the noises outside. And you have to accept all the noises inside. Not to reject them, not to repress them, but to allow them their day. But soon, it'll be like the buzzing noise of a distant traffic. We're sitting here in the ashram, and in the early morning, well, not so early morning really, when the traffic starts. Now the main road, the main vessel of traffic in the early mornings will be on a Navan road, and you can actually hear the traffic. But if your mind is steered elsewhere, you won't hear them at all. You won't hear the traffic, but you'll be accepting it. Because if you try and do battle with your inner noise, the noise will win. Because you're coming up with another thought. You're coming up with another disturbing set of waves of struggle. And don't forget, meditation is a song, not a struggle. It's an acceptance, not a blockage. It is a letting go, not a holding on. So we have to be prepared to let go. And one recommendation, we have to sit in a state of helplessness. We have to feel that nothing belongs to us. And that where we sit, only two things are present. The object of our meditation, in devotional meditation, it is our most beloved and ourselves. And even if you are meditating in a room full of people, this attitude is essential. It's not that you're blocking anything off. You're accepting the presence of others around you and then leaving it there. Accepting it and leaving it. Allowing your thought to depart from this, so there can be no distractions in meditation. There are only leads. And in time and time again, I give this one example. I'll give it again very briefly. You see, of a person, an architect, devotee in Zimbabwe, that built a beautiful house in a pristine area, and Zimbabwe is always warm. And from the house, you could see the mountains in the distance, and made an outside kind of cave as a kind of shrine. Got up 5 o'clock in the morning, out, sitting there in the morning, in pristine conditions, but complaining, I cannot meditate. Why? As soon as I sit, the borehole pump comes, the motor comes, tuck, 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 tuck. Now, I've just said there's no distraction in meditation. Is this not a distraction? It doesn't have to be. We can take the marvel, the miracle of a sound, any sound coming up. We can take it also from anything that comes up from the unconscious mind in the same way. And everything that comes up is an indicator. It is a lead. It's like a signpost that leads you deeper and deeper into your internal forest. And the object of meditation, which is not theistic in any way, supposing you say, you see, I don't believe in any God. I don't believe in any religion. I can't accept it. But still I wish to meditate. Is it possible? Of course. You take anything that comes up, and you can take this gross form of pure existence itself and allow you to investigate properly, to gain some insight into it through concentration, and lead you to the subtle elements of it. And the subtle elements of it will ultimately lead you to a cosmic mind. That will lead you ultimately to a self that remains. Whatever you're observing, supposing you're observing the mind in turmoil, can you not also understand? Don't forget, getting away from first person singular. Can you not also understand, I am the entity that watches it. I am the observing entity. The flash of that realization is a wonderful thing. For the time being, that is a flash of the truth. When it's repeated and becomes a flow, that concentration becomes meditation. The concentration is not meditation. Concentration is a step toward it. It's important to know the difference between ordinary concentration then and meditation. And it's not just ordinary concentration. Meditation is something special. You can see that as a special kind of concentration, or you can put it in a different way. It is centering yourself. It is finding a center and operating from a central commanding post. When consciousness is centered inward, then that flow of centeredness becomes a meditation. Now, normally, our attention can be centered in many other different areas. So normally, all these things that are inserted into the unconscious mind with varying degrees of stress and worry and assessments and all kinds of relationships and relatedness and word associations, reactions. All of these are deposited in the unconscious mind, a kind of boiling pot area. How to control the unconscious mind? We cannot do it directly. We can only control the conscious mind. The conscious mind is the only gateway to the unconscious. Since all of the unconscious impressions came through this gateway to start with. Whatever we find in the unconscious or subconscious mind is just an accumulation of all our experiences from many, many seconds, many, many minutes in human calculation, hours, days, years, and lifetimes also. Evolution, from our point of view, is an accumulation of experience that manifests itself ultimately as behavior. So we have to cultivate something different. We have to shift our center of attention or our center of consciousness. Most people then are concerned with how they move and operate in the world and deal with all the so-called routine activities of the day, and how to operate where we know there'll be reactions, where we know we'll have obstacles, where we know that we would rather, on some occasions, be elsewhere. That creates anxiety for ourselves. It is the art of yoga, that is, the art of gathering the scatteredness, the scattered energy that we call the mind, gathering it inwards and making it one-pointed, ekagra. That is concentration. Until we find that concentration becomes absolutely refined. How do we know when it's refined? We have no sense of time. And concentration is a condensing thing. Concentration shortens the period of time that is normally available for doing an action. We do it quicker. We do it more efficiently. This is a practical aspect. This morning I sat down with the devotee. They said, every week can we study the Bhagavad Gita? Yes, we can do it. Today was the first day. And they brought out a book. And the book was to do with success, achievements, and goal setting. I forget the name of the book. I wasn't that worried about the book. And this person said, you see, this Bhagavad Gita, that's fine. That's all spiritual life. But what about if we want to achieve some kind of success in this life? What if we want to, in the language you're using during this talk, shift our center of consciousness to the outside and set goals? Then my reply is, you're setting yourself up for anxiety. And I know all the language of the goals. The goals must be specific. The goals must be measurable. They have to be attainable. They have to be realistic, and they have to be time-bound, organized. And then they have to be planned. They have to be scheduled. All of this is fine. I have no objection toward that. But put your goals somewhere and leave them there. And understand fundamentally that the real goal of life is to find and discover your own happy freedom. That point of freedom that gives you superb joy and superlative joy, that peace that you get that passes all understanding. So many descriptions are there. These are all human aspirations, and we all look for them in different places. So supposing then this world is an ocean of energetic activity with centers in various places. When it comes to our attention, we have a choice to center it on the external things, goal-orientated things. Taking for granted that this world is our only reality, our center of attention is there. But you see, the center of attention gets shifted. Nature has a way of doing it. Because the rhythm gets upset, we come across some obstacle that pushes us off course. Like a boat, a storm arises, it pushes the boat off course. How to get back onto course? If we go back into the storm, it's not going to work. We have to try and find a way around it. The art of sailing means arranging the sail in such a way that it's always facing the wind. Now you may go in a direction and the wind may go in a different direction. And so you learn the art of progressively putting the sail in such a way that you are tacking. In other words, you're going not in a straight line, but zigzagging toward your central goal of land, say. Now, we don't come just as a material entity with material concerns. We have an understanding of aesthetics and culture as well. We have more of a refinement to our nature, and we can shift our center of consciousness to there as well. We can shift our consciousness also to energy. Now, energy, if we take it in a scientific way, we'll understand that there's no such thing as an entirely localized energy, that the whole of energy is also something like an ocean. And if we apply this knowledge or this concept of energy, we can revalue the physical body itself. We can revalue our own body and that of others also. We can treat them as a whole and see them out there in the field, rather than as separate, divided things in space. We can view all food and all bodies molded out of it as eddies in the limitless ocean of energy. Swami Vivekananda, in his various commentaries on Patanjali Yoga Sutras, in his wonderful assembly of talks called Raja Yoga, or his dictation of it really, he gives this wonderful, wonderful concept of this universal energy, what we call prana. We can start thinking of this energy, let's say with distant galaxies, and then from there come down to the sun, which is the king of the solar system, and then physical eyes will continue to register them as self-luminous bodies moving in space. But the eye, which is the inner eye of discrimination, will perceive them as whirlpools of cosmic energy. And the real boundary between them, except those caused by the rate of motion, will be non-existent. Many poets, artists, devotees, they treat them as maybe artistically, poetically, as angels of the Lord, who go ahead to make the crooked places straight. So this is a device for aiding in the promotion of harmony in the universe. And the interspace is not luminous like the sun. It's a field of light waves, invisible to us. Sound waves, invisible to us. And you know, in the electromagnetic field, gamma rays are also there, X-rays are also there. But one field is there, and all play their different roles in making the earth fertile so that food can be produced. Now we have a meditation going. From the very extent, the very outermost, considering it as a kind of ocean of energy and bringing it inwards. And judged in this way, what is seen is an unbroken sea of creative energies all around us. And in this sense, prana, or the life of all, is like that. So the concept of I and mine can also be included in the wider concept of all. That means instead of saying I and mine, we can say he and she, or it. Thought, as I mentioned so many times before, acts as a sort of suction, naturally pulling towards the thinker the values that the thinker attributes to what he considers to be real. So when matter appears as bodies, is thought of as good for all, the law of suction causes an inflow of everything needed to nourish that person, because that person is included in the all-inclusive statement, all. And all life energy inundates that person, improving your health, improving your longevity, improving the quality of your thought, including your value waves increase and improve and get refined. And the thinker habitually entertains whatever he habitually entertains in this way will duly condense into matching scenes in front of you. With such a habitual movement on a day-to-day basis, when you sit for meditation and listen, then will these things come up? Will the higher values come up? Meditation doesn't start with sitting. It starts with operating at your workplace. It starts off with you getting up in the morning. It starts with you having conversations with other people. It starts with you understanding the world in a different way, revaluing it as divine waves of consciousness everywhere. Then your center of consciousness becomes shifted to the spiritual area, as it were. This center of consciousness, therefore, not just one center, but many centers, but the final centrality or centering, or the process of centering consciousness, is really to settle your attention into the innermost depths of your own being. Progressively, joyfully, with no repression, with no guilt, with no struggle, accepting everything. And whatever bubbles up in the mind is also an expression of consciousness. And that's why I say there can be no distraction in meditation, because everything that arises in the mind, every avenue that the attention moves along, can be taken and used as a starting point to go inward more and more and shift your consciousness, shift your center of consciousness until the center itself is there. What is the individual soul? I repeat, a circle whose circumference is nowhere, but whose center is in one place. And when we arrive at that central point, we have discovered the truth of our own reality, of our own being. And more than that, we have made a connectedness. Centering consciousness is about making a connection. Now, I selected the topic because it's actually a phrase in use. So, centering consciousness is a phrase used by Thomas Keating. Thomas Keating is a Roman Catholic Cistercian monk in the same tradition as Thomas Merton, with the same intention of taking the meditative, the deep mystic union, goal and process of the Desert Fathers in Christianity, and making sure that we don't neglect it in this modern era. And naturally, there is a connection between Buddhist meditation and Vedantic meditation, yogic meditation, and so on, since much of these practices are seen to be akin to these. And when somebody comes for meditation advice, they may well not be Christian. So those who are Christian can find Christian phrases and words that lead you in a centering way. But the principles are very interesting. First principle is make sure that you are seated comfortably and select a word. We did it in the guided meditation. Any word that is relevant. If you use a word such as Amen, or a word such as Father, or some such word, or a word such as Kyrie, which is Greek, it means the Lord. You use any of these words, you have to use them with intention for connectedness, and they have to be relevant to you. It's no good giving them to somebody who doesn't believe in all of that, who's not a Christian. Now we have one centralizing sound symbol, and that is Om. And whether you know it or not, it is automatically centralizing. But it's better to know what it means. As a means of repeating this sound symbol, Patanjali is very clear, and commentators are very clear to say, and meditate on its meaning. And although the sound will evoke something subtle, when you understand its meaning, it now becomes part of your centering prayer or your centering consciousness. And making that an anchor, you then allow all the thoughts to come in. You open a floodgate. Come on. Come in, please. And once they come in and allow that, ultimately they become like distant traffic noise. Like sitting here in the calm and beautiful environment of the ashram and hearing in the distance morning traffic. But if the ear is not tuned into that, you won't hear it. If the inner ear is tuned into the central theme of your life, centered in the heart, then all these noises fade away into the distance by themselves without any competitiveness. You then are in a position to take advantage of the voids, and there you'll find a listening moment, and there you'll find a series of listening moments that ultimately become a meditation. Centering in a different sense. That is, taking your faculty of concentration and beaming it in a certain place. So physically within the body, there are a number of places where you can visualize where the center should be and then start feeling that center, start identifying it, entering into it until nearness becomes oneness. So one would be the center of the eyebrows. When repeating your mantra, this may be a natural place where you'll find a resonance there, a kind of throbbing there. In the yogic language, this is called Ajna Chakra. It is an area, as it were, where the cosmic mind can open up for you. And so Om is a symbol of cosmic mind. Naturally, if you repeat Om, you'll feel a kind of throbbing there. You'll feel that that center, as it were, becomes activated. And then there is the top of the head. You can center that there. And this and the top of the head is recommended for formless meditation. But most people do not do formless meditation. Most people would want to do devotional meditation. In any event, whether it's devotional or whether it is impersonal, whether it is to do with thinking of the self of the size of a thumb, the expression in the Upanishads is always in the cave of the heart. Nowhere in the Upanishads does it ever say, meditate on your arm or your elbow or your hand. It's always the heart. But what is this heart? It's not the physiological heart. It is the core of your being, and the yogic understanding of it, when it comes to the energetic field, the energetic equivalent of it, it will say that there is a center there, and from there comes so many thousands, it varies the number, so many thousands of nadis, invisible channels that direct prana or energy throughout the body. And the other one will be the navel that distributes much, much more because it's the center of your life. And the yogic concept will be that these nadis will be distributed there, 72,000 with 72,000 sub-branches in some texts. And this would be a manifestation into the physical also. So where is it coming from? If we even take this, we can trace it back. There's some entity which is pure existence, which is pure consciousness and pure bliss. And as it expresses itself as the will to live and survive. It expresses itself as, in terms of, you see, the consciousness, it expresses itself as human intelligence and the capacity to analyze and discriminate and judge and make executive decisions. And then there is this other aspect, Ananda, bliss, that comes out as the capacity to love unconditionally, is the highest form of it. And so you'll see that the essence of our own being inevitably has to show itself in every single aspect, from the subtle to the gross. And the subtle will come out in its mental form, in its thought form, then it's in its energetic form, and in its physical form. We can understand it like something like a flower that opens. What is the key to it opening? It has to have an attitude of openness. It has to be the opposite of closed. Closed is mean-minded. Closed is something like a miserly attitude. It has to be an opening. Let us say that this flower is pure love. Let us see how it opens with the spirit of generosity. And along with it will come light, will come knowledge and understanding. But it requires, first of all, opening, accepting. And then a part of accepting will be listening. So if we go back, for example, to energy or prana, the different ways of its expression in the living being comes out as 5 modes, if you will, of energy, or an energy configuration. One works upwards, one works downwards, as it were. One distributes throughout the body in terms of the entire circulation, and one becomes a royal entrance, the energy going up through the head. But always there's a way of centering. So we have to, when we sit, we have to decide in our normal life, where do we wish to center our attention? Where do we wish to shift the flowing consciousness? Where do we want to channel it? And taking ordinary activities, we can channel it toward the highest at any given moment as a kind of delightful activity. If we don't take it in that way, it'll be a struggle. And then that will be against us too. Then we'll be frustrated. I can't do this. Then when we sit in order to center our consciousness in what is called meditation, the natural condition of our habit level will come out. We will find that we have automatically peace of mind. And we don't have to achieve anything or struggle. The achievement is in the future tense. And struggle is to do with first person singular. It is egocentricity. That we have to let go. Now there are various obstacles within this according to your personality type. Supposing you're a type that is active, physically active. As soon as you sit for meditation, you'll be up in another 2 minutes because you'll assume this meditation is doing nothing. 2 friends met. Did your son get a job yet? He was lying around, doing nothing. But fortunately, he's taking up meditation, and now he's still doing nothing. See, that's a wrong concept. So cultivating the thought meditation is a highly conscious, active state that leads you to a poised condition. Don't think that you start off with that. Don't expect to be calm when you sit for meditation. Look for all the disturbances, accept them. and then bless them with divine, sparkling magic dust. Pour the grace on them lovingly. Make them friends, and they'll soon cooperate in the process. And then, of course, where you shift your attention will have its consequences, will have its effects. There's a marvelous story that is told. It is really the Oriental equivalent of the Cinderella story. You know, the land of Bharata is the traditional way of calling India. It's foreign people who call India, India. And now, of course, it's caught on in India itself, but it's the land of Bharata. It's a Bharata Varsha. And so there was such a person called Bharata. Of course, many people call that, but this one particular person was a great king. And being a great king, the great king followed the traditional way, understanding that the goal of life is really perfection and freedom. And so at a certain point in his life, once he had gotten used to the accumulation of all the worldly pursuits that a king could pursue, wealth, happiness, enjoyments, progeny that carries the line on, decides that he wants to retire into the forest. Of course, we have to have a little fun about this because retiring to the forest is not a huge journey. Towns and cities were quite small. The forest may just have been across the road. Anyway, going into the forest, the idea is the same, seeking seclusion. From time to time, we are told in spiritual life, we should go into solitude. So we go into solitude. So having then performed all his duties, he gave the throne to his son and retired to the forest. And instead of course, having palaces in the forest, drinking from gold and silver goblets and all the rest of it, being surrounded by jewelry, he then builds a small hut with his own hands and enters into meditation, only living as hermits do on wild roots and herbs. Even these are collected by his own hands. So days and months and years passed like this. And then there was a scene that presented itself in front of him because one day a deer came to drink water nearby and exactly where the royal sage was meditating. And at the same time, there was a lion that roared. And the deer was so terrified that she, without even satisfying her thirst at the river nearby, made a big jump across the river. But the deer was with young, and this little foal came out because the deer had such great exertion and with the sudden fright gave birth to the little fawn and then, of course, fell dead. So out of compassion, what does the king do? Who's now a sage in a forest? He takes the deer, nourishes it, dries it off. He takes it out of the foaming stream and in a motherly way feeds it with his own hands, gives it water, makes some milk, makes a fire to warm it, and with great care and attention fondles the little thing back to life. And then, of course, the kindly sage decides, I will protect this fawn. I'll bring it up on soft grass and fruits, and became extremely fond of the deer. But of course, deers grow up from the infancy and wander further and further away into the forest. And with each passing day, Bharat becomes extremely anxious. I wonder what happened to my little fawn, my little child. And so his mind was so attached to this that, of course, what became of his meditative life? He went into the forest to become detached. Now he found himself, instead of being attached to power and position and family, he's now attached to this little deer. And when the deer went out to graze in the forest and was late in returning, then the mind of this royal sage would fret, start to become anxious. He would think perhaps the little one has been attacked by some tiger or another lion. His mother was attacked in this way. Or perhaps some other danger has befallen it. Why is it so late? Now some years pass in this way, and of course one day death comes, as it comes to all of us. And of course, naturally, the last thought of the sage was thinking about the deer. And with his eyes fixed upon the sad looks of his beloved deer close by him, his soul left the body. And of course, you can predict the result of this. In the next birth, he's born as a deer. But naturally, as a deer and as a sage, sufficient karma has accumulated. He remembers his previous birth. And so he lives out his prarabdha karma, as we call it, his accumulated fruits of his previous actions. And again, as all bodies must fall, the deer then dies and becomes reborn in a family. And remembering his previous life, he determines, I will not make the same attachment. I will not make the same mistake. It has been a deviation on my path. I'll just keep quiet. And in keeping quiet, in this value of silence, that is, silence is what we were discussing. Of course, if you're silent, you can also be listening to your own inner thoughts. So inner silence is also necessary. Now, because he lived in the family and never spoke, his family thought that he was dumb and stupid. But he wasn't. He was strong and he was intelligent. And so they took advantage of him. Something like the Cinderella story. They abused him, gave him all the menial tasks to do. And when all the sons got married, even the wives abused him and gave him dirty work or inconvenient work, unpleasant work to do. But you see, on one day when one of the wives was particularly cruel, he sat under a tree and the royal party passed him, thinking that this person was just a laborer and needing somebody to carry, the palanquin on which a king was sitting. They simply took him, hey, you, come, and put it on his shoulder. And he never said a word. So he was going along like this, but you see, he was full of so much compassion that he wanted to avoid all the worms and all the insects under his feet. And so the palanquin became pretty rocky. And they turned around and said to him, look, my dear fellow, if you're feeling that this is too much for you physically, why don't you take a rest? And without speaking a word, Bharata went on. And very soon after this, and having seen that the palanquin was rocky, he said, fool, rest a while. If your shoulders pain, rest a while. And then Bharata, laying the pole of the palanquin down, opened his lips for the first time in his life and said these words. Whom dost thou, O king, call a fool? Whom dost thou ask to lay down the palanquin? Who dost thou say is weary? Whom dost thou address as thou? If thou meanest, O king, by the word thee, this mass of flesh, it knoweth no pain. If it is the mind is the same as thine. The idea is the body is made from yesterday's pasta and tomatoes. It has no sentiency of its own. It is reliant on the mind. And the mind is the same as your mind. There's no boundary to the mind. You can't say where this mind starts and your mind finishes. The mind is universal. But if the word thee is applied to something beyond this, that is the self. That is the divine self. The reality in me, which is the same as in thee, and it is the one in the universe. Of course, religion calls this self God. Dost thou mean, O king, that the self can ever be weary, that it can ever be tired, that it can ever be hurt. I did not want, O king, this body, I did not want, O king, this body did not want, to trample upon the poor worms crawling on the road. And therefore, in trying to avoid them, the palanquin moved unevenly. But the self was never tired. It was never weak. It never bore the pole of the palanquin, for it is omnipotent and omnipresent. And so he dwelt eloquently on the nature of the soul and of the highest knowledge and so on. And the king, realizing that this is not a fool, saw this as a remarkable enlightened sage. I ask thy pardon, says the king, O mighty one. I didn't know that thou wast a sage when I asked thee to carry me. Bharata blessed him and departed. He then resumed the even tenor of his previous life, because despite his hardships, despite how he was treated, internally, he had an equilibrium of mind. He had this steadiness, sthita prajna, steadiness of wisdom. And so he resumed the tenor of his previous life. And when ultimately he left his body and spent his prarabdha karma, he was freed forever from the bondage of birth. So you can see where we shift our attention is not just the outer, adoption of a certain lifestyle, thinking that we are free, because the attention can be steered, and it is the emotions that steer it. And so we have to be ever vigilant about it and learn that where we shift our attention, our center, we become that center. If we center all our affection on this deer, in this case of the story, then that's what we become born as. But we can ever be aware of how our attention is centered and how to shift it as we want in a higher way and a more useful way. So centering consciousness is not only a goal, but it is also a process. And in this centering of attention that was adopted by Thomas Keating, he goes, and the most important aspect of this is accepting all of these so-called, all the traffic noises that come up, accepting them, adopting them, befriending them, and allowing them to settle by themselves. And that point becomes that kind of centering, which is a listening. Actually, if we want to make this informal, we can have space for some more questions if you want.
I'm not sure if I'm moving away from our vision, but I'm experiencing. Yeah, it's actually not pertinent for now. Just an experiencing. I felt I needed some helpful reflection on. I think I'm more connected with, the centering consciousness now than the question that the feeling that I needed assistance with something. I might name it and then it might drop away. The experiencing in the past tense at the weekend was to be in beautiful surroundings, natural surroundings, that I esteemed as beautiful, truly. And maybe 10 human beings. And I found I only wanted to commune with nature, with the birds, with the horses in the new foal, with the cows who came to the gate, with the beautiful, incredible field in front of my eyes, with the sheep and their new baby lambs. And what I found was drawing away from the human conversations. Yeah, and there's a dilemma for me.
So I don't know why it should be a dilemma, because there's a difference between antisocial and the enjoyment, as it were, of natural internal silence. The unwillingness to interact with people is a natural result of attunement, really, to what is beautiful, provided, of course, we understand that same beauty is within human beings also.
That's the dilemma. That's the dilemma.
So, actually, we love a lamb, a newly born lamb, because it is so innocent. We love domestic animals because they love us and they never argue with us. We never have a controversial debate with a dog. A dog just looks at you with milky eyes and is willing to please. So, but man is of a higher dimension because man has the capacity for the fullness of perfection. But of course, not all men manifest that. Not all people manifest the highest traits. They manifest the most depraved traits very often, of jealousy and hatred, violence. But yet the possibility is within everybody. So we have to engage the inner eye, the penetrating eye, to see the God within them. And that is why the scriptures will tell us this. He who sees the self in all beings, and all beings in the self is the expression, never comes to grief apart from anything else, but gives you the correct insight, the universal insight into everybody. So I'll repeat some things that I often say. We don't come in a single unit. We come in layers. The Taittiriya Upanishad gives us a number of sheaths, koshas. The physical sheath, and Bharat would, the story of Bharat would have gone through some of these. So the human body is naturally part of nature, and nature itself is imperfect and subject to change, and the human body is subject to pain and disease. In Ramakrishna's language, we have to pay rent for the body. That's the rent we pay. That means that everybody has suffered in the past. Even a child will fall down and graze the knee, or may have broken a bone in youth, or whatever it is. So we have to accept the fact that the human body is subject to pain at some stage. And right now, there may be pain with us. And definitely, all of us will suffer in the future. That's the fact. Then inwardly, in the psyche, the emotion, on the emotional level, it's painful. The pain comes from attachment. But nevertheless, more or less everybody is suffering on the mental level. Everybody is struggling, everybody is wanting peace, and everybody is trying to deal with it as best they can. And so on two levels, we can be compassionate. We can be compassionate for the external suffering, compassionate for the internal suffering. But then we have to go further with a penetrating vision and see, Lord, you are there. You have to recognize that because of that, the flow of consciousness comes out as mental activity. It comes out as a moving body. It comes out as the shining eyes. When you look at the eyes, we're not just looking at molecules. We're looking at an expression of an inner intelligence. And the ultimate sits behind, we call it consciousness. A person moves. Why? Because a penetrating vision will discover there is something called life. The author of life is there, but life itself, we call it existence. Existence itself is there. It comes out as movement. And then, of course, there's the other aspect. When we have a penetrating vision, we see pure love. And that comes out as love and emotion. And it's the same energy that comes out as fear and hatred, as comes out as love. It's just one energy. And having the capacity to take that and steer it, direct it more toward a higher purpose, a loving nature. We have the capacity to transform that. Only we have the capacity to transform this, to take the raw material that we have and transform it into something useful. Useful for all. And all includes ourselves. It's not separate. So it's the art of playing that game. First of all, we have to observe. Lord, you are there looking at me through the eyes, dressed up in a human form. Challenging me, will I recognize you? Will you recognize me? Will you see the player on the outside? The combinations of forces? The cosmic ocean manifesting just in this localized, centered way? And will I then see, there you are. Salutations. Thanks. Give me the next example, another person. So that what we see as an endearing thing in all the animals and so on in nature, as we classify it, don't forget humans are part of nature. You are also a part of nature. You are the highest manifestation of nature.
I think it was the being drawn to the presence within the animals, their present momentness, and my desire to commune with the landscape and the present momentness of the animals, and that the conversations coming from the mouths about shoes and shops, it was as if there was a pushing back of that, a non-desire to entertain or enter that.
Yes, but you see, we can do we can do what you did. We can remain silent and divert our attention toward the God within. But then you see also, all communication is an emotional communication. And the content may be about things other than nature, and you may want to steer the conversation toward that. But then you see, we also have to be discriminating in the company we choose as well. Any diversion away from our central goal or a central appreciation of the here and the now and the divine in the now should be avoided, if possible. If not possible, we have to take it as an opportunity to exercise our own qualities of patience and to see, in amongst the traffic, can we still see God? Regardless of what is being spoken, the capacity for speech is a glory. But it also requires a little cleverness. Walking, you see, walking with all the opportunities of appreciating the here and now and being and generating a feeling of divine thankfulness in the moment. See, all of that, you see, can be dealt with a little diplomatically also. So we can hear the first second about shoes that were purchased in the shop and then say, yes, did you notice? And point something out and direct the other person's attention to what you yourself are appreciating. That would be a useful thing.
Well, when I came to the field and the expanse, there were red kites flying, and some joined and took that in. But I found myself then solo walking at some points, actually.
Yeah, so be it. We do whatever we can to avoid diversions, And sometimes that means we have to select proper company. And sometimes that means that the company that we have that we can't avoid, we have to make the most of it. And we have to have that penetrating vision to incorporate those who have the capacity to speak regardless of the subject matter. and the capacity to walk, and let them have a conversation with themselves. You don't have to engage in it, by the way. You can keep silence. The silence itself is a communication message.
As long as it doesn't have a flavor of finding fault.
Well, that's within you.
Yeah.
That's entirely up to you. The finding fault aspect will be entirely yours.
Judgment.
Yeah. So you can be walking, and the noise, which you would interpret as meaningless noise, coming up, and then you can accept it with compassion that this person is coming from an emotional point of view and wants to express themselves and wants to engage with you and so on, and has a need for social company. Or you can, so you can appreciate that, or you can internally say, I wish this person would shut up. And why would they talk, and how superficial they are, which unfortunately puts you in a superior position, which is also full of egocentricity and acts as a big obstacle and blockage. There is a great difficulty with so-called spiritual people that put themselves on a different level and wittingly or unwittingly, spoken or unspoken, look down their noses at other people with this view, I am enlightened, I am wise, which means, of course, you're the entire opposite. See, keeping one's mind tuned in to the glory of the self, that is a continuous exercise. That is the whole, really, of internal spiritual life. Spiritual life is the art of sportfully staying attuned to the glory of the self.
So in the experiencing, the glory of the self being experienced in nature, in the immediacy of the animals engaging. So the glory of the self is knowing, no matter what the subject matter is, that another speaks.
No, because you don't criticize a cow for mooing.
With the shoe shopping.
It's all right.
Exactly. So
yeah.
There's something about that aspect of the allowing or the...
Yes, so as I say, you can control the conversation a little bit and say, yes, that may be well, but right now, have you seen this? Have you seen that? See, it's the same with a child, isn't it? A child, you do the same thing. A child will get distracted, and then you say, yes, but have you seen this? A child will fall down and hurt its knee. You pick the child up and you say, oh, did you see? Look at the flowers, look at the tree. Very, very soon, the child's attention will shift.
So the invitation...
And then the forgetfulness will be there of the falling down. Tears will flow, and then you say, yes, but look at this. Easily you can divert a child's attention. And are we not all just children anyway? Instead of playing with dolls, they're playing with shoes. Instead of dressing up in play, they're dressing up in shoes and saying, look at my shoes. It's all right.
I'm actually feeling the movement of compassion now towards the
there we
shopping.
are. That's the movement that we're looking for. The movement of compassion. And until that movement comes, it's always held in the intellect area, which acts as a judge and a critic.
Yeah.
And uncharitableness, no compassion whatsoever. So we leave it there. The subject of centering consciousness. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.